Hello and welcome back to High Fell on what is a cold and frosty day. Another TT 120/08 locomotive, and as you can see, a collection of electrical parts to go inside. After fitting the 8-pin decoder, looking around at some of the comments people were making about how easy, how hard it was, the availability of parts, the cost and things like that, been looking at some tweaks that we can do to this install, and I think we've actually come up with something that's going to make this easy for the majority of people, and that really is what it's all about. So you can enjoy your little 08 shunters with full Bluetooth control with sound. It does make it extremely good value to use the HM DCC sound system. So what we're going to be using is an Next 18 decoder. As you can see, it's got the Next 18 socket on the bottom there. This is going to be an advantage because these seem to be more readily available. The prices seem to be keener as well. I've seen these going around for as little as £40, but like anything, when you see a bargain, you need to really get it when you see it because it might not be there when you go back. The other great thing is we don't need to do any soldering onto the decoder itself. I'm not going to use any of these solder pads, and we don't need to do any chopping of any wires, so we don't need to cut a plug off, so there's no influence on warranty. Although, to be fair, these are super reliable, and I've always found Hornby incredibly flexible with warranty, and their customer service is pretty much second to none. So I can't speak on behalf of Hornby, but certainly some companies, if you start messing around with items too much, they're going to say, no, that's not covered. So how are we going to do it? What you will need is one of these natty little adapter plates, which you can get from Trainer-matic. So that's Tram Fabric. I shall put some links in. And so that's got the decoder socket there, and on the reverse, it's got the solder pads that we're going to use. Nice and generous size, so quite easy to solder to, bigger than the ones that are actually on the decoder. So if you're not brilliantly confident with your soldering, this should be quite easy. Plus also, this is a £2 part. So you're soldering onto something, and if you can't really get it too wrong, but if you do have a bit of a mishap, you haven't written off something quite expensive. So that's how that's going to work. It also means that we haven't got the extra wiring in the way, and you haven't got to faff about with that. We also don't need to take the keeper plate off. We don't need to remove the pickup point either on the loco. We're also going to use one of Trainer-matic's superb stay alives. These are much more compact than the AE one. I'm going to show you some other advantages. It has a smooth back, so no components on there. That is going to help with the install as you see how this is going to happen. But the big thing is the capacitors themselves are much smaller, and that is what is going to allow us to fit everything. Everything is going to go inside the body, the main body of the loco, which means we don't need to take the cab off, which is another thing that some people said, oh, that looks a bit fiddly. It does take time. It's not desperately difficult, but you do need to take your time with it. And of course, like anything, when you're taking the bodywork apart, there is always a risk. But here we're going to leave the cab intact. So we're not going to be taking much of the loco apart compared to the original one. And again, we are going to use the supplied speaker for the whole install. So no other parts needed to be bought. That's what comes in with your decoder. So without much ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the lid off here. I'm actually going to skip this around a little bit, so I'm going to show you this when it's been finished so you can see what we're aiming for and what it's going to look like. If my editing has worked, you should be seeing this before it's done. So we've got the whole assembly fitted onto the chassis, and everything is within inside the main body of the loco. You can see inside nothing's had to be taken off. The cab's still intact, the bulkhead's still intact. So speaker mounts sideways, so we're chamfering the corners off one of the enclosures. So that's quite an easy job to do. The capacitors, you can see one sits up at the front and one acts as a little bridge across. We have the control board for the stay alive here, mounted with the flat face pointing out. All of the wiring is contained within there. This comes round. We're utilising the existing plugs, so it is easy to attach, and then the decoder itself is connected to the motor and the rails via the adapter plate that you can get for these. Using some tape just to hold that in place, and that just really aids installing the body. Once that's been on there for a while, it'll maintain that shape, so if for any reason you do need to go in, it shouldn't all collapse on you. It's quite an easy way of doing it, and if I show you from behind, you can see how it sits on an angle like that. That's basically what we're looking to achieve. So what I'm going to do is take you through step by step how we can get there and the parts that we're going to use. So with the body off and taking the screws that hold the decoder tray and the motor cap, that's 3 screws there, you can remove those. The 2 wires that you want to remove from the PCB are the first 2 on the left hand side. So running from the left, the first one, the second one, because they're the ones attached to the little spring contact plate that brings up the track power. So once you've undone those, you can lift this all free. I've already taken the motor cap off. There we go. Basically we're going to dispense with that because of course we're going to fit a coreless motor to this. So now what we need to do is think about attaching the wires to our little board here. So the next thing to do will be to work out which solder pads we're going to use, tin them, and then just simply attach the wires. I'm going to leave this the length that it is because that's perfect. Okay, so the key part to this installation is the This Way Works coreless motor. So this is how they come, and this is the latest iteration of these. Now they are laser etched, so you know it's the genuine article. So if I just show you, we're not going to use the top spacer because we're gluing this in. We're just going to use the lower one, and that pops in like that. There you go, there's your etching. A couple of other differences: it comes pre-wired and it's really nice quality wiring as well. I'm going to trim that down because it just gives us a little bit more room to play with. Same as before, the worm gear is already pre-fitted. This is specific to the 08, so although the Hornby motors are the same across, these do have different gearing, so this is more appropriate to the 08. And then the other part of it that makes this all come together is this adapter plate. And with your adapters, when you get them, you'll have a little diagram showing you there's 3 different versions. The ones we're using for these, for the Hornby HM 7000 decoders, they require a female connector. So there's a male plug on the actual decoder itself, and then it's the female one. There's 2 different versions. Effectively you can use either. This one has more solder pads on. I got a pack of 5 of these because I'm probably going to use them for other things, and you can pick up for things like lighting or other electronically controlled functions on your loco. Now you'll see I've actually put a little red marker on there, and that's just to tell you the way that we're going to orientate this. If you look on the underside, you'll see there is it's visible as a semicircle. It's actually circular, gold disc underneath, and that, sticking to my hand, is going to be in this direction. So as I'm sitting here, that little gold bit is towards me. Then the only reason why that makes a difference is that when you plug the decoder in, and bearing in mind the decoder is going to go this way, so that the plug is at the top for the adapter plate, and then the stay alive and the speaker are going to be sited here. That means then that the motor is going to be driven in the correct direction. And if you do add other functions, things like headlights will work when it goes forwards as opposed to reverse. The great thing is with Next 18 you can actually fit them in either way around and it won't do any damage. But so we're going to get this the correct way, and then we're just going to use the little diagram here to work out where they're going to go. First of all, these are your two track connections, these are your track inputs, and if you look, the one on the left is for the left hand rail, and if you check here, so you've got track right and track left. You've got two options on the pad, so you can use either of those for the track left, and you can use either of the top two for track right. Motor plus, so the red positive wire from the This Way Works motor would go to the top left hand corner as we're looking at this, and the blue would go to the bottom right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to set my iron up, and then I'm going to tin these. I'm going to pop the track ones on. I'm going to trim this wire down, say a little bit, and then we'll pop the motor in as well. Okay, irons to temperature, tips nice and clean. So we're going to do one of the motor pads. Nice little blob of solder there, and then I'll do the other motor pad here. And then we're going to do one of the track inputs. There we go. And that's it. So when we come to do the wires, they'll just pop into there nice and easily. So the next thing I'm going to do is just measure out the motor, the length of the wire for the motor. Just going to pull that off there. Black tack's really handy for holding stuff while you're soldering, but of course if you get too much heat in it can sort of stick. If you use a blob of it, just wipe any excess off. So here we go. So the decoder's going to sit here. The track inputs are going to be going across on here, so we can measure out what we need for wire. So I'm probably going to chop them down about that much. What is really nice with this wire is it's really nice to solder to. So that's that trimmed. It's got a silicon insulation, which is the way that a lot of wiring is going, and it's actually quite nice also for being able to strip. Okay, so I've just exposed the tips of the wire there. Just hold that in place. Make sure. There we go. Let's have a look at the track pickups. Let's see if that needs any additional wire, any additional solder rather. That one's looking a little bit thin. One of the things that people don't talk about with soldering is making sure that you clean your iron after you've used it, as in every time you've done some soldering, wipe off the excess if there is any. Right, so that should be okay for that. So next thing we're going to do, we'll use the motor just to support. Let me move that decoder out of the way. So I'm just going to hold that in place with a bit of black tack there. Make sure we get this in the right. So little gold marker down the bottom there. And if you're not sure, just refer back to your diagram. So the motor positive is going up to the top, motor negative here. Track left is at the lower one, and track right is the top one. Now with a decoder, that will always sort out things like the track power. It doesn't really matter too much, but if you, for example, were to remove the decoder and put a Next 18 blanking plate in. Of course, you can do that really easy with this, and you're back to DC again. So if for any reason you want to do that, that's a really easy thing to do, no soldering involved. You could obviously leave things like the stay alive and the speaker in place, but of course that won't work, so it's just really a question of preference or whether you want to do that. Right, so that is the soldering done for the padding. See, it's really easy. You don't have to put a lot of heat in. We've got our decoder is safe, so even if you have a mishap, which you're probably not going to have. So there we go. And remember, just double check, yes, space is in there. And the next thing we're going to do is pop a little bit of super glue on. So I'm going to put 4 blobs of super glue on. Look at this, new tube, special occasion. Now I tend to prefer buying lots of small tubes because super glue, the ends get all gummed up and goes manky, so I'd rather sort of use up a small tube. It can work out a bit more expensive. I once bought a huge tub of it and ended up throwing most of it away because I was cutting the tip down so many times to just get it to come out. Right, so the motor's in, just a little bit of pressure, make sure that's seated home. Then we're going to put that to one side, and then we're going to get on with another little part of the project. So while the motor is setting and the glue's going off on there, what we're going to do is we're going to now do the speaker part. So this is the speaker as it comes from Hornby. Just going to mark my red wire. I don't think it matters, it's just habit of always putting wires back where they came from. So I'm going to expose the soldered joint on here. And I'm going to shorten the fly lead from the plug, make that 65mm. That's got you enough distance to reach over, but you aren't having to try and wind lots of wire around. There is some space now because the fact it doesn't, that motor, if you notice, doesn't have a rear shaft coming through, so it meant that we've got a little bit more room to play with. Maybe I forgot to tell you about that. So here there's no shaft, so you don't have to worry about wires catching or anything like that. But I find that if you trim wires, particularly as things like the body is so tight on these, it just means that it glides on rather than having to manipulate it too much to get it to fasten. Right, there we go. So that's all done. The next thing I'm going to do, so I don't get any dirt in this, I'm actually going to put the enclosure on. And then we'll take the wire off, so we'll just desolder it, shorten the wire, but before I put the wire back on, I'll also then do the modification to the enclosure sides. Doing that's just a bit easier for me. Ta-da! Ready, there we go. Right, so I'm just going to put that to one side now. And then, so I'm going to shorten this down to about 65mm. Got a handy measure on the side of my board. So trust me, I've measured that to 65mm. Effectively, where you're going from, if you imagine, you're going to come from the speaker, or rather, it's going to be this way around, isn't it? You're going to come from the decoder here and round to the speaker. So, just going to nip the wire off. twist it slightly. Just get this bit, that's it. Just get a little bit of the insulation off. This and just a little dab. Okay, now sometimes what happens is when you with this with the speaker wires, sometimes the insulation will shrink, so what you can do is you can just shorten the exposed metal bit off a little bit if you want to. Right, so put these bits to one side because it's going to get a little bit messy in a moment. And what you want is some just regular glass paper, something that's fairly abrasive. If I show you in the loco itself, what we're looking to do is take the sharp edge off there so that the speaker can fit at this angle like this. It can't at the moment because the exhaust moulding is in the way. So what we need to do, say, is just take off at an angle, and the easiest way to do it is just to draw it across some glass paper. As you can see, I've already experimented with doing one of these before. And this is literally the only bit of plastic trimming that we'll have to do on the whole of this job. So effectively a potentially throwaway part. It's just the enclosure. You can't, again, it's not rocket science. It's nothing you're going to get too far wrong. There's quite a lot of thickness in this plastic, so there's quite a scope for taking material off. So even if you're adding the sound to something different, a different scale or a different loco, that might be messing around with the actual enclosures themselves. It can be an option. Okay, so effectively that's where we're going. We'll see how far we've got with it. It's worth remembering that you want to put it so that you've got good access to the wires. We still need to go a little bit further on both of those, so I'm going to keep going with that. I'll also have a bit of tea and then come back to you when this is actually down to the correct size. So I spent just a few more moments just gradually wearing some of the sides away, and hopefully you can see now, if I get that light there, you can see the speaker just nicely slots in behind the exhaust moulding, and it comes right over up against the body mounting pillar without having to take any material off inside at all. So the next job will be to solder the wires back on, and then we can start looking at the stay alive. Just going to quickly show you, I've angled the wires so they point in towards the centre of the speaker, and that's going to naturally help the wiring push over to the side that I want it on. When the speakers come, they're wide, so they pull away from the speaker, and of course you've just got to find the space for those to go. Right, so now on to the stay alive. So there's full directions on how to wire these up, and the thing to remember is there is a negative which is marked by this white chevron pattern down the side of the capacitor, and when you're wiring these in series, you're going to take a positive and attach it to a negative. So the plain black side here, that's going to attach to the one with the white chevron on. The other side, we can ignore those for the moment because they'll be picked up off the brown and the black wire there, which again is shown all on the little diagram that you always get with these. And what we're going to do is make it so that the capacitor is going to sit just below the height. So this is the one that's going to sit upright, and this is the one that's going to bridge across the worm. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop those into something to hold them while I just solder those, and I'll trim those wires down. So I'm just holding the caps with a little bit of black tack. Let's get some heat on and a little bit of solder. This usually solders quite nicely. There we go, that's all it needs. So now these two are attached. It's also quite handy because these legs, as they call them, the wires that come off, they are flexible enough and the solder will hold that securely that you should be able to move things around, so that when you're putting things in position you can just do things like that, just drop it, get a little bit of angle on. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to just trim off the excess. So wire cutters, just going to trim it off there, and then I'm going to trim this one here. Okay, and then the next thing we need to think about is actually wiring this up to the control board. Again, if you always double check against the instructions, because you don't want to wire these back to front, otherwise it won't do them any good. They'll be kaput. So the black wire is the one that's going to go to the resistor that's got the white stripe on, the negative. And at the moment that is sticky there. That's the one that's here. What we're going to do is I'm going to trim this down just a couple of millimeters, and then I'll cut some, I think I might have some here. Yep, here we go. I'll cut a little bit of heat shrink and that'll go over. You have to remember to put the heat shrink on before you solder it, because you won't get it over the top of the control board. So the distance that we're going to go for is about this much. And I'm also going to shorten the wire. So to measure up your distance, and I'll give you some distances anyway, but this is going to be going over here. That's going to pop into there. That controller is going to sit there. So the amount of wire that we need for the negative, which is going underneath that, going to be about this much. So what's that? Let's have a little look. It's about 15 millimeters. So, in fact, no, it's not. It's more than that. Don't trust that scale. Let's have a look at that. It's about 20 millimeters. So, don't go too short. Here we go. I always think it's actually quite good to do these one at a time. And the reason for that is it leads to less mistakes. So I want to have a little bit of heat shrink to go around. Doesn't need to be a huge amount, probably about 10 mil. So the first thing I'm going to do is pop that over the black wire and the brown wire as well. If I hit that square on, there we go. Now I did look at the advantage of putting any heat shrink around the control board, but it's got a completely insulated side. There's nothing for it to there's nothing rather to contact with the decoder itself, and it does just take a little bit of space. And the one thing we haven't got huge amounts of in the width on the 08, because of it being obviously such a narrow bodied vehicle. Right, so let's get this one soldered in. I'm just going to pop that there. And now let me just tin the wire. That brown one's just in the way a little bit. There we go. And then if I'm feeling lucky, what we can do is just lift that leg up slightly so we're not up against the casing. Move it out of the way. Put a little bit of solder on, so that's already tinned. And then using my tweezers, I'll use that to hold, apply some heat. That's it, nicely on, and that's it. So then all you need to do is fold that flat, bring your heat shrink over, this is 4mm heat shrink. There we go. In fact, that's so tidy that I'm not even going to bother putting any heat on to shrink it any further. It's just a nice cover on there, and it just basically means that that joint is insulated. And then we're going to do a similar thing with the other one. So I'm not going to go too far down, only a few millimeters. That's how far it needs to be. I'll just move it back up just for soldering. Trim the wire off. Sorry for hands in the way of the camera, but I do need to be able to do it. Right. So again, just going to trim this wire off. I'm just going to pop this like this for the moment, and then just get those wires a little bit tidier. A little bit of heat. There. A bit of heat on there. Then bring these two together. In fact, that's it. It's such a satisfying thing when it just all flows nicely. There we go. And then I'll just get another piece of heat shrink, which I've felt drop down on the floor, and we'll pop that on. Okay, so I've recovered a bit of heat shrink and pop that on. Something you'll see that I've done there, I've put like a little Z bend in this fly lead, and by doing that, that means that's going to just take up the excess wire, so you don't need to shorten this one. There is some memory, some spring in this wire, so if you don't form something like this, it can spring, it can be a bit of a pain. So by doing it like that, if you do fold it, don't do it right at the edge of your PCB where the soldered joint is, because that will just snap it off. Always make your folds or your bends in wires just away from where the soldered joint is. And then the next thing we need to do is to remember to put some insulation on across the top of the motor. So I've cut a strip of 15mm wide, because that's how wide the motor is, insulation tape. And so you don't need to go more than that, because if you remember from the first video, the decoder, the plugs, if I pick up a decoder and show you, so the plugs that the Stay Alive and the speaker mount into, they need to sit here. So you don't want this wire protruding, or rather don't want the tape protruding sort of whole load over there. Got a nice plastic insulated section on the back of this motor as well. So that's all good. Unfortunately, it's going to cover up the nicely little etched genuine product marker. So I'm just going to pop this in, and remember the actual insulation type. When you're trying one of these, if you're not too sure about stuff and you're trying it, you can hold the motor in place with insulation tape for the purposes of just testing it, and that should be absolutely fine. But long term, you do need something, which is why the super glue option has been developed. Make sure that is tucked up well out of the way if you've got a little excess bit, because the wheels are just below there. So there we go. We've got now, it's starting to come together. And I find then the next thing to do is plug the different components into the decoder itself, and then we can start moving things around, and then we'll use a little strip of tape just to hold it in place. So, plugged in the speaker, and I've plugged in the Stay Alive. Remember, on the contacts sit on the top of the actual plastic plug. And then next thing to do, I'm going to just pop the Next 18 board in. That's a nice positive click. And then we should be able to start bringing everything together. So, pop these onto this side. Now, what you want to do is just bend these wires down nice and gently, and keep them separated so there's not one on top of each other. And that means you're going to have the least amount of wire poking in the way when the body slides down over it. It is just a little bit of patience, but it's not difficult. I think that's one of the things that I need to stress. I mean, when you get used to doing these, you can knock them out in, well, less than 30 minutes. It's a lot better when you don't have to film every last bit. Okay. I've got myself some tape. And then what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to secure my decoder. So I've got the angle that I want on there. Just make sure that wire is not in the way. So it's starting to resemble what I want. Just poking that up into there. That should hold that just in place for the moment. Oops, no, I haven't stuck it hard enough. Right, so then the next thing we want to do is start putting the Stay Alive capacitors into position. I'm just going to use a little bit of black tack and secure onto there. And we're going to bring the speaker wire over to this side, out of the way. And with another little strip of wire, tape, I just need to cut some tape up. Got myself another piece of tape cut. And then what I'm going to do is put that one over there, and just as I'm putting that in, you can just see the springy nature of that bit of wire there. Now, of course, what I would actually say is if you do this for the first time and you're not sure how it's going to go, before you get too carried away with taping everything in, just give it a try, make sure everything's working as you expect. Do remember that as you've been handling the loco, you would have put greasy fingerprints all over the wheels, and so the pickup might not be very good. So give the wheels a bit of a clean, give them a fighting chance. And also with whatever stay alive you fit, they're not instantaneous. So, you know, again, remember that, you know, to a degree, you'd still need some clean track and clean wheels. Otherwise, the stay alive is always trying to charge and then discharge in quick succession. I mean, there is that saying, you know, there's no substitute for clean track, and you know, you can't escape either poorly laid or dirty track. But of course, one of the things is the Bluetooth function on these drops. If that drops out, it can be a real pain in the backside for people. So these really are a bit of a boon for that. And any short loco, to be honest, actually is going to always be better with a stay alive. So here we go, we're done. So you can see I've just basically manoeuvred bits around. So the things to check before you try putting the top on: make sure all the wires are tucked well out of the way and they're not going to come into contact with anything. You're looking to make sure that the speaker doesn't go over its kind of like marker there. Also with the speaker wire, I think I might have done this actually off camera a while, but rather than, don't put it through the heat shrink, just pop another little bit of tape round, so that it's taped to the capacitor. That'll keep it up out of the way of the worm gear. You can see there's loads of clearance on that. It's just, if for any reason you wanted to replace a speaker, it means you don't have to take the heat shrink off or whatever. And another thing I just spotted, just make sure that black tack that you may have used you could super glue the speaker in place if you wanted. I prefer doing black tack simply because if it has to move a little bit as it goes in to find where its position needs to be, obviously you've got that little element of movement on, but just make sure there's none protruding out. One, because it's going to block it, but also you don't want the body to stick to that. The beauty of this is, the way I've done this is that when you put the body on, it's going to just slide on nicely. But when you take it off, everything should stay in place. If you go poking everything and sticking stuff into the cab up in the top, or not the cab, but into the body up in there, when you try taking it off, you've got some bits that pull on, then wires come off and stuff like that. And of course, you've still got the pads available if you want to do some lighting, which you might want to do that at a later stage. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this onto layout and just make sure it's working before we pop the lid back on it. Okay, we're on the home straight now. I've had this on the layout. I've uploaded the 08 profile, tweaked the volume down to 20, otherwise I find it gets a little bit overpowering. Do remember that when you've fitted the coreless motor that you must also lubricate the worm drive as well. Don't just leave that dry. Next thing to do will be to fit the body and then pop the screws in, and that is job done. So fitting the body, check first of all visually that you haven't got any wires in the way. Make sure that nothing is outside of the little moulded line that the body will snuggle up to, and then it's just a question of slide it on. These front pylons sometimes can just stick a little bit, so just take a moment just to make sure, and a little bit of tightness. That's literally the tape, the insulation tape that I've used down there. That is what is making. Careful you don't prod your contacts on the bottom. And then I'm just going to fit the body screws, and then we'll pop this on the layout again and just make sure everything is still working. I won't dislodge something as we've fitted the body. Little tip: if the screws don't sit on, just use a little tiny bit of grease. Old engineer's trick to hold the screw on there. Don't fully tighten one down and then go on to the next one. Do them all in a little bit of a cycle round. Whatever you do, don't, if the body's not coming down, don't just use the screws to force it down. You'll damage it. There we go. Right, next thing to do, pop it on the layout, give it another check, and then I'm going to also show you a comparison between this and the sound system that's available from Digitrains, which I have in 2 other 08s, which is really great, but it's £160, and that's not with a coreless motor. So you can make your own mind up which one you prefer. Yes, I love the Digitrains ones, however, I think for half the price and also loads of flexibility with this as well, it's a stonking idea. So to the layout. Okay, so here we are, we're on the layout, and first of all we're going to fire up the Next 18 equipped 08. So bear in mind this has got the Next 18 Bluetooth decoder with sound, as you can hear, speaker as supplied with the decoder, so it's not a super small one. It's just using the smallest enclosure that Hornby do in that pack. We've also got the Stay Alive, which is coming from Trainomatic, and the adapter for the Next 18 plug, which again comes from Trainomatic. So you can check those things out on the Tramfabrique website. Sven will look after you properly on that. The motor is a coreless motor. It's the latest one that's come from This Way Works. And if you get in touch with Richard, I will put a link to his website where you can buy the coreless motors. I don't get anything out of these, just happiness that people have got their locos running and are really pleased with them. And obviously the other bits and pieces, well, shop around. So decoders, say there's various prices, and 08s, whatever you can find. So I've given you a little bit of a sample of, that's the sound on the Hornby profile, which of course is available free of charge from the app, which is also free of charge and brilliant. So just for comparison, I'm just going to start up the, so this is the Digitrains sound project, which is really great, but by comparison, the decoder, the Stay Alive and the speaker, that combination and the profile is £160. So big difference in comparison to what you can put sound in for, and again, that's not with a coreless motor. So there we go. It can be done. Thank you very much for watching. As always, please get involved in the comments if there's any questions you want to ask, or if you're trying this project at home and you get stuck with something, shout. There's always plenty of people that will actually prepared in the hobby to help you. Like, subscribe, share if you feel that way. It's all great. It just means more people see the videos. I'm not bothered about any monetization on videos, so it's an inconsequence, isn't it? So all remains for me to say, as always, is do take care of yourselves and happy modelling, and I look forward to seeing you on the next high fail video. Bye bye for now.